Hello and welcome to the Under Center podcast. I'm your host, Daramar, and I'm joined by two of the founding members of the latest cryptocurrency coin to hit the market. It's called Rotcoiner, Jake Woolhead and Fionn Malloy. Lads, there's Shiba Inu, there's Dogecoin, and now there's Rotcoiner.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Me and Fionn worked like weeks trying to get this algorithm down so we can make a lot of money. No, I mean mine a lot of coin. Yeah.
I'm a little upset that you didn't ask me to get into the ground level now here, but I guess I'll let it go for this time. I'll just take my cut out of, podcast proceeds.
Yeah, it can't be a pyramid scheme if you let everyone in at the start.
Especially if you're at the top.
We have a good show in store for you today, guys, because we are talking the NFC East, and it is not the football team, and it is not the Giants. We are talking the Dallas Cowboys, and to help us talk some Cowboys today is Kyle Youmans, who is from the Talkin Cowboys Show. How are you, Kyle?
Doing well, guys, and pleasure to be joined by you guys and talk a little Cowboys this offseason, especially since I've been informed that you guys are Washington fans and New York fans, and so I'm glad to be able to share a little bit of America's team with you guys.
Oh, that's what we're doing, Kyle. Okay,
I don't think anyone in America uses that except
it's only us. It really is. It's really Cowboys.
Before we do get into some Cowboys talk, if you haven't already, could you please like this video and subscribe to the Under Center podcast? We have recently moved to our own YouTube and audio channel, so as many subscribers as we can get, we really appreciate it. While you're there, make sure you follow us on our social pages. That's facebook.com/undercenterpod. It's the same for Twitter and Instagram at Under Center Pod. That's where you'll find us, and we'll keep you up to date when we release the latest shows. But let's get into some Dallas Cowboys talk. And Kyle, let's start with the schedule release last week. You're going to be starting with the Super Bowl champs, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, on the opening night of the season, which is the start of 2 away games in a row to start the regular season before coming home to face the Eagles in your first divisional game of the year. Some highlights of the schedule release. You've got your bye in week 7. The traditional Thanksgiving game this year is going to be at home to the Las Vegas Raiders. And then at the end of the regular season, which is very interesting, 4 of the last 5 games will be divisional games. What do you think of the Cowboys schedule?
Well, I think I like it overall because, first off, the bye week is always one of those things you look at initially, is because you want to know where the bye week is and you want to know where your team can get healthy. It's a little early this year, and I feel like that's probably the biggest downside to this, is because you just mentioned the divisional games, the 4 out of the 5 at the end of the year, and you kind of pair that with an early bye week. It's going to make things tough. That's going to be a gauntlet toward the end of the season because just like you guys know of being fans of the NFC East, anything can happen and everybody has a target on their back. So that's going to be a very crucial part of the year. That's ultimately going to decide, I think, who wins this division down that stretch of those 4 of the last 5 games being against divisional opponents and seeing that afterwards. As far as the first couple weeks, I'm okay with not opening up until the Monday night game against the Eagles, because one, you kind of get to go on the road, find your footing a little bit against the best competition. I mean, Tampa Bay, Kansas City, those are the top 2, and you get Tampa Bay week 1, and then you get Kansas City a little bit later on in the schedule. I feel like where your team's going to be heading into those crucial matchups later on. I'm not saying they're going to be wins for the Cowboys early on, but I'm just saying I think you'll know pretty good of where your team is, where you're going to end up if you're finishing up week 1 and then heading into the next couple of weeks of the schedule.
Carl, you mentioned as well the early bye week. Do you think the extra game this season is going to add an even extra wrinkle to that and maybe play into some teams of when the bye week is going to play a bigger impact this season than we've seen in last season? Or do you think maybe the extra game is a little bit overhyped on the injury side? What do you make of that?
I don't know about injuries specifically. Usually if you're going to play NFL football, injuries can happen week 1. They can happen in week 17. It's going to happen no matter what. However, having 17 games, it will take a toll on the fatigue, on the more unconditioned teams. Of course, this offseason being half virtual, half in person, playing a factor in how these teams are going to be conditioned. The teams that practice at their facilities and have more hands-on availability with their coaching staff and their players, I think are going to have the bigger advantage. And that's going to play a factor deep into the year. So I wouldn't necessarily say that game is overhyped, but it is something to kind of keep an eye on whenever you do week 15, 16, 17, and then finally into that 18th game. And then if you have an early bye, this is the worst year to have an early bye. And I think that's where the Cowboys are looking at it of like, man, I wish that bye week would have come in early November or even toward Halloween. Of course, the Halloween game on the road in Minnesota is going to be a fun one, but I think they would have rather have had a bye week in week 8, 9, or 10 than having it early on in week 7, especially in a year where there's going to be a lot of feeling out of the process of getting through a full 17-game schedule.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's going to be crazy. But I'm thinking you mentioned the kind of the gauntlet at the end for the basically the NFC East running like the last 4 of the five games for you guys. It's going to be a bit tough. This is why I love the NFC East. It kind of always comes down to like the last couple of weeks. I don't know when the football team's bye week is. I think the Giants is week 10, so we got a little bit lucky on that regard. And now we kind of come into that end where I think, of all the divisions, it's the most fun to watch in that because we all can kind of come down to the end, see who gets that win. It unfortunately came down to the football team and the Eagles last year, but we'll have to let that one go by because I'm still a little bit salty about that one.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I jokingly tweeted this out whenever the schedule was released. I was like, well, guess we're going to figure out who wins the division week 18 against the Philadelphia Eagles in January of 2022. Like, that's when we will know who wins this division because that's how it always ends up coming down to it. And I'm not necessarily saying it'll be the Cowboys and the Eagles specifically fighting for that position. A lot of people were like, the Eagles will be packing their bags. They'll be making tea times by that point. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that game's still going to mean something, especially when they're as evenly matched. I mean, the Cowboys should see an uptick with Dak Prescott. They should see a bit of a turnaround with their offensive line getting healthy. Washington's a team that at least last year you said, oh, man, if they would have had a quarterback, they would have been something more dangerous. Well, now they've got at least half of a quarterback with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So there's at least a little bit there. I think the Giants are on the uptick. I think Washington still got one of the better defenses in the NFL. It'll be evenly matched all the way down to the final weeks of the regular season. And just how it always is whenever the NFC East comes to a close.
I'll tell you my prediction here. The Giants, the Cowboys are going to be tied first. It's going to come down to the Eagles, and they're going to trot Jalen Hurts down there, and then they're halfway going to, like, they'll be kind of winning, and they'll halfway through the game pull out Jalen Hurts and put whoever they could trot out off the street, just like what happened last year.
Yeah, I was about to say that sounds just like somebody who's already been hurt before. That sounds like somebody who's still got a little bit of that heartache from a year ago. I don't blame you. If it would have been roles reversed and the Cowboys would have been in that situation, one, I would have been having to sit up here in studio all day until the Sunday night game to watch the Cowboys playoff chances fly off into the wind along with the Eagles. So I would have had the same exact thought process you did. But, man, yeah, that's kind of how I feel like things are going to go whenever this year comes around.
And that's one beauty of the schedule change now this year as well. We won't have to wait till Sunday night to find out who is winning what division, because now we have the double header on the Saturday to compensate for the loss of the Sunday night football, which I'm sure will keep everybody happy. Well, not everyone, but at least the division winners and, neutrals like myself for the time being. But you mentioned Dak there a little bit. One of obviously the main talking points of last season was the awful injury to Dak Prescott. How is Dak doing in his rehab, and is he looking like he'll be ready for week 1?
It looks like all systems go from here at the moment. I mean, we'll see him kind of in spurts out there, working on the ankle, kind of running back and forth. I really do like the progress that he's made. Even a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at him, I was like, man, that doesn't necessarily look like it's natural. It doesn't look like he's back to 100%. Sure, there's a long way to go, but I was like, that's not necessarily encouraging. A couple weeks after that, completely flip-flopped. It looked like he had turned a corner a little bit, and was running much better, was very athletic, and was able to kind of do a couple different things with the football in hand. He was throwing on that ankle. And so I think whenever the week one comes around for the Cowboys, there's going to be Dak Prescott behind center, which is a huge plus for this team. There's going to be a little rust factor. I mean, this is a guy who didn't miss a game in his entire career leading into last year until that pesky team from the Meadowlands decided to knock him out with an ankle injury in the fourth quarter. Yeah, looking up there, I saw that. Yeah, I just don't necessarily think it's going to be the same exact Dak that we saw that was putting up unworldly numbers in the first 5 games of the year last year. It's going to take a bit of a learning curve, I think, but he's going to, in terms of health, he's going to be good to go. He's just got to get that timing back and get that confidence in that ankle before he can return back to 100% or even better than what he was previously.
Something that'll help out any quarterback when they're struggling, whether it's a rookie or someone returning from injury, is leaning on the run game a little bit. And last season, I think Ezekiel Elliott didn't live up to maybe what you guys are hoping. I don't know if he had an injury. Certainly, you mentioned the offensive line wasn't playing to the standard that you guys would have hoped, and that's been improved on this season. Do you expect a big bounce back from Zeke, or is that something you're slightly worried about and going to keep your eye on as the season progresses?
I'll definitely keep my eye on it because especially with Zeke, this is a pretty important year. I mean, you're paid to be the top running back in the NFL, and last year he didn't even eclipse 1,000 yards. And so there's a high standard of excellence that Zeke needs to reattain. He's done it before. It's not like he's not good enough to get there. He's got to find a way to do that no matter what the situation looks like in front of him in the offensive line. Like you said, the offensive line should be better. You should get Tyron Smith back. I think the Cowboys are very confident in what his health is moving forward. Same thing with Lyle Collins, who was not available at all last year. If they're both back and they're both healthy and available for the majority of the games, I think you'll see the Zeke of old. He's been working day in, day out with some extra trainers. He's been here at the Star. He's been at the facility working out. So at least from what I've seen and what everybody has seen on social media, he's looking pretty good. I mean, this isn't going to be Cabo Ezekiel Elliott where there's a little extra weight on them. He looks slim. He looks quick. I think he's got a chip on his shoulder after last year because all of a sudden there were doubters to his game because of the big contract, because of the lack of production a year ago without an offensive line. I think he wants to prove people wrong. So even if the offensive line isn't necessarily healthy, I expect him to at least have a better year than he did last year. But if they're healthy, watch out. He may be back in the Pro Bowl.
Kyle, just to flip on to the other side of the ball there, we obviously just had the draft go by. How excited or ecstatic were you guys to have Micah Parsons drop to you at 12?
You know, it's interesting. It's split between Cowboys Nation. I think the split probably comes as a part of our fault here on the media side of things because we really liked a lot of the offensive prospects that were available, including Rashawn Slater, who was there at 12 as well, at least in terms of the defensive side of the football, which is obviously going to be the area of emphasis for this team after what the year was in 2020. It really came down to J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain. And those were the two names that you really felt comfortable taking at pick number 10. And Micah Parsons was at the bottom of the list. There were 4 names, and we put this out heading into the draft. 4 names: J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain, Rashawn Slater, and then the 4th name on that list was Micah Parsons. Not necessarily because of the talent. I think he's a top 5 talent in this draft class in terms of on-field alone, but there are some extra questions about him in terms of his maturity, in terms of his commitment, his potential of moving to a city like Dallas and being able to stay productive and stay focused. So those extra question marks pushed them behind those other prospects. So whenever both the corners were gone and it came down to a defensive player in Parsons or an offensive tackle / guard like Rashawn Slater, the choice was made by the Cowboys to pick the defensive guy. I don't fault them for that. And Micah Parsons is a hell of a player, but there were a lot of people around here that were pretty angry with the selection because of the question marks that were there and because of the potential. Now, I think they felt better after the Cowboys traded with the Eagles to go from 10 to 12, and they picked up the 84th overall pick. But there was a little bit of hesitation from Cowboys Nation to really look at Micah Parsons the same way, especially when they've been burned by linebackers in the past. You think about a first-round pick in 2018 with Leighton Vander Esch, who hasn't necessarily been healthy since his rookie year, who's had some inavailability problems. And then there's Jalen Smith, who was taken in the second round a couple years prior, who showed out in 2018, but never has gotten back up to that point ever since he signed his long-term contract. So there's a lot of question marks around the linebackers anyways. And with the high, at least high draft capital that they've used on that position in the past, going right back to it, especially with a guy who had question marks, I think this fan base was burned from the last time, and they didn't want to get burned again. So mixed feelings about Micah Parsons, but overall, he's a talented player. He may be the most talented player on this defense outside of DeMarcus Lawrence. So there were people excited, but there were a lot of people that weren't.
That trade was like that trade was like the enemy of my friend is my friend. This is like, I was kind of happy with it though, with the trade back, get that first round from the Bears. So I was okay with the trade in the end.
Yeah, see, that was interesting because you don't think the Cowboys and the Eagles trading, especially for a wide receiver as talented as the Heisman Trophy winner Devontae Smith, would ever happen. But it was because he was going to end up in the division anyways. If the Eagles didn't take him at 10, the Giants were going to take him at 11, and then the Cowboys would have been there at 12. So either way, he would have been in the NFC East, but that way the Cowboys could still get the guy they were probably going to pick at 10 and then pick up an extra top 100 player. I think it was pretty easy from that point to make the decision and to work on it that way.
You mentioned a little bit there, you guys had a lot of draft picks this year. And I kind of maybe half expected to get a kind of bundle deal and maybe pick some of those lower picks together and kind of move up maybe in the second round or the third round to try and get a couple of the maybe top talent, like you said, maybe a top 100 guy. But you kind of stuck where you were and chose the whole way down. What's your really quick, just overall summary of the draft? And have you guys addressed everything you hoped they would, the majority of it, or is there question marks on a lot of these picks?
Yeah, I was right there with you. I thought they were going to bundle picks together as well. I thought we were going to see a couple trade ups. They did it even last year to go get Tyler Begatis, another trade that they made with Philadelphia. They wanted to go get their center, and they went up and did that. So I expected that, especially with 11 picks this year, but they made all 11 picks, and it was kind of interesting. But with the current contract situations and, of course, allocating so much money to Dak Prescott and that mega deal that was signed earlier this offseason, this front office is very, very focused on finding cheaper contracts and working their talent from a cheaper, younger level. And I think that's why they ultimately made all 11 of those selections. And not to say all 11 are going to make the team. If anything, if we're being realistic, 6 or 7 guys are going to make the team, and the other draft picks will fall off and either be practice squad or picked up elsewhere on waivers. So there's some question marks around what they actually filled. We got to see rookie minicamp a couple days ago, just outside from where I'm sitting right now. And it looked like really the needs that you really wanted, linebacker, defensive line, interior defensive line, those needs were met. In terms of offensive line depth, I think there's still a huge question mark. In terms of safety, I think there's a huge question mark. You added another corner, actually a couple extra corners in Nishan Wright out of Oregon State, and then second-round pick Kelvin Joseph out of Kentucky, who I think you feel really good about fitting into a new defensive coordinator Dan Quinn's system. So there were needs that were met, but there were definitely some that were left on the table, and we're going to have to see how they elect to fill those, especially when they're trying to keep things relatively on the cheap side.
Yeah, and you have hired a new defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn, of course, former Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator with the Seahawks. And, that sort of makes sense with the Micah Parsons pick. Micah Parsons can be maybe his Bobby Wagner going forward if all things going well. But it's sort of like a whole new defense for the Cowboys anyway, because like I said, there were a lot of players that have left in the offseason. You've got the likes of Aldon Smith, Xavier Woods, and Chidobe Awuzie. But he's picked up a few familiar names from his time in the Falcons as well, with the likes of Keanu Neil and DeMonte Casey. So do you think those sort of players coming in, those experienced players used to the Dan Quinn system, will help sort of the current players and maybe the new draftees as well to sort of get accustomed to the new scheme?
I think it will. I think you're going to see a lot more certain decision-making from a lot of the defensive players on that side because of those guys that they brought in. Keanu Neil was brought in as a player who was a first-round pick who just never really lived up to the expectation, mostly due to injuries. He's going to be that linebacker safety hybrid. So he's going to play a little bit of both sides, and he'll probably play a lot of strong safety and rotation with Donovan Wilson, but he'll also probably play a little bit of weak side linebacker and cover some tight ends and things of the sort like he did in Atlanta. And then with DeMonte Casey, he's going to be that strong safety. He's going to have a huge presence there with maybe a couple of the other guys that are learning the system. But last year, this defense, especially with a virtual offseason, a fully virtual offseason, looked very slow to decision-making. They didn't look confidence in their play underneath Mike Nolan and his new system. And I think this year Mike McCarthy said, okay, we're bringing in a new defensive coordinator, one we feel more confident about and who has had success at the NFL level as a defensive coordinator. And then we're also going to bring in guys that can teach their peers how to fit the system the right way. And I think that's what Neil and Kazee ultimately bring to the table. A lot of what they're going to do isn't going to be shown on the stat book. It isn't going to be shown on film. It's going to be in practice. It's going to be on the sideline. It's going to be those teaching moments, because both of them, as veterans who have played for Dan Quinn, who understand that system in and out since they entered the league, I think that's going to be invaluable for this defense, especially for guys like Leighton Vander Esch and Jalen Smith, who need to see an upgrade. For Micah Parsons, who's going to come in and hopefully, like you say, play that utility linebacker role, who's going to be a pass rusher, also a run stuffer and things of the sort. And then, of course, for the secondary as well, you really want Donovan Wilson to take that next step and continue on what was a strong 2020 campaign. And I think Dan Quinn's the right guy to lead all of that and kind of finally put those puzzle pieces together.
Kyle, I just have one quick question. I know we're coming to the end of the podcast here, but on your totally unbiased opinion, who is winning the NFC East this year?
Oh, it's the Dallas Cowboys. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it's tough. I think the Cowboys should be favored in this division. And the reason why is because you look at the four teams and you pick the best quarterback. And the best quarterback right now is Dak Prescott. And Ryan Fitzpatrick going to Washington intrigues me, because if you get the best part of Ryan Fitzpatrick, Washington's going to be really good. And I think with that defense and that front seven, they're going to cause a lot of issues, much like they did a year ago. But if you get the 30 touchdown rather than the 30 interception Ryan Fitzpatrick, then you're going to feel good. If you get the 30 interception Ryan Fitzpatrick, I'm not as confident. So I want to see what Ryan Fitzpatrick does first before I really put all of my chips into the middle for Washington. I think Dak Prescott's going to come back. He's going to be at least close to what he was prior to the injury. I don't think there's going to be any sort of drop-off. He may not be record-setting. He may not be the best quarterback that the Cowboys have had in quite some time, but he'll come back and be ready to go, and they're not going to throw him back out there, especially with that contract, if they're not comfortable with him getting back out on that ankle. And I really do think this defense will be better. So if Dak Prescott's back, that's a top 5 offense in the NFL. If that defense is anywhere above 20th in the league in terms of total defense, and they're able to force a couple of turnovers, which I know Dan Quinn is trying to do, I think they're going to be a team to be reckoned with. I'm not going to say Super Bowl champs or get up in a conference championship conversation, but I think certainly winning the NFC will definitely be within grasp for this Cowboys team.
Well, I'm sorry. As a Washington fan, I have to dispute. I don't know if he's got the best quarterback in the division. You certainly have the most expensive quarterback in the division. I'll give you that much. Personally, we have to assume we're getting Fitzmagic, not Fitztragic, as Jake likes to call him. So, I'm gonna have to dispute you on that one. Best quarterback.
How long has Ryan Fitzpatrick been in the league, and how many teams has he been on? That kind of just
put it like
shows
this:
you.
if he puts a touchdown on the board for every year he's played in the NFL, I'll be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, that would help out a lot, wouldn't it? The only problem is
Kyle
he's going to have the
said he's
same
a half
amount of
quarterback.
interceptions.
That could be. He might rival Winston for the 30 for 30.
But before we let you go, Kyle, just looking at a few other areas that the team could improve before the start of the season, because I was listening to you talk on your radio show earlier this week about it, and it was the backup quarterback position, probably getting some experience in there behind Dak Prescott. Obviously, Andy Dalton was there last year, and he did as best a job as he could to sort of, keep the ship going after the Prescott injury. But there is no sort of experienced quarterback on the depth chart at the moment. So would there be any sort of names floating around that you think the Cowboys should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think that ship might have sailed at this point. I know last year following the draft, it was pretty quick that they signed Andy Dalton because they knew that was a void that needed to be filled. And little they didn't know how big of a void that was going to fill whenever Dak went out for the first time in his career. I think, at least from what we've seen, they've brought in a couple of quarterbacks. JT Barrett, most notably the former Ohio State quarterback, was up at the start, and he was throwing to some of the rookies during the minicamp process. And really none of the quarterbacks that came and showed out were necessarily anything that was better than what you've seen. You've got 4 quarterbacks right now under contract, with Dak, Cooper Rush, Ben DiNucci, who was a 7th-round pick last year, and then Garrett Gilbert, who came in and started a game against Pittsburgh this past year as well. So I think they feel more comfortable with those 3 guys backing up Dak Prescott rather than going out and finding someone, especially – like you said, whenever there's really nobody out there. I mean, the quarterbacks that you would have at least entertained the option for, maybe like a Tyrod Taylor or a Blake Bortles or a Brian Hoyer, guys like you said who have that experience and are willing to come in as a backup, they're all off the market, and there's not really a ton of options out there for the quarterbacks to bring in. So I think they're probably going to ride with whoever they've got here. And then maybe address that in the future, and we'll see how that turns out, and hopefully Dak's able to stay healthy.
Yeah, and just looking as well at the sort of center position too, because on the depth chart at the moment, there's only one, and that's Tyler Begatis. I hope I pronounced that right. Yeah, the 4th-round pick from last year. Now, you were mentioning as well that your 7th-round pick from this year, Matt Farnock, was taking some snaps at center as well, so he could be possibly looking at a backup.
Yeah, I think I froze here.
No, we can still hear you. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So, I think overall, Farniok is going to be that backup center. He played all 3 positions during his time in college, played a tackle, played a guard, and played center as well. And as a late-round pick, you got to be able to do multiple things, and he does those things quite well. Tyler Begatis is your starter. He was going to be your starter no matter if you brought back Joe Looney or not. I think potentially if you wanted to move Connor Williams to center, you could. I think right now he's pretty much locked in at that left guard spot, but you're right. There's not a ton of depth there, and I think that was one of the biggest questions with me after the draft was over is what are we doing with the offensive line? We saw the revolving door that was the offensive line last year. Are we really able to do that again this season? So I think you're going to see Begatis as the number 1 guy. Farniok might see some snaps there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a carousel of guys moving in there during training camp, trying to figure out who exactly is going to create that depth at the center position and allow the Cowboys to be successful.
Excellent. And before we let you go, Kyle, where can people listen to the show or find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Kyle_Youmans. It's actually the way that I set up my name right there, so you can go follow me on there. We're live every week here from the Star in Frisco on Talkin Cowboys. During draft season, I'm also the host of the Draft Show, and then we've also got tons of content throughout, like The Blitz, which is a television show on our website, and then the pre- and post-game shows as well. So we're all over the place. Just go to DallasCowboys.com, and you're going to find plenty of content. If you're looking for Cowboys information, it is all right there, and you can find me on there as well.
Excellent stuff. Listen, Kyle, we really appreciate your time today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the off season, and we also hope that if we don't get to speak to you before the season starts, maybe at some point again during the middle of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, you guys. Thanks for doing what you do.
Excellent stuff, guys. That is it for the show this week. Before we go, if you haven't already, can you please like this video and subscribe to the Under Center podcast on YouTube? If you prefer the audio side of things, just go to wherever you get your podcasts and just search Under Center Podcast. You'll find us there, so subscribe to that too, so you'll get each and every show whenever we upload it. Also, facebook.com/Under Center Pod. Instagram and Twitter is both the same as well, at Under Center Pod. Jake and Fionn, thanks so much for coming on again.
Thank you very much.
And that is it for another show, guys. Like I said, make sure you're tuned in for the rest of the week, where we'll have some more shows coming your way, continuing our off-season series. But until then, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.